so we should... Can I borrow his? I know, bring my own. Good afternoon.
Hello. My name is Sarah Chada, S-A-R-A-H-C-A-D-A. I am an obstetrician that practices in Lincoln, and I went to medical school, and then I did 4 years of training in OB-GYN. What led me to the field is my first delivery that I did when I was a med student, and it was a beautiful experience, and I was hooked. I have an article that I've distributed from the American Journal of OB-GYN going over some of the actual numbers related to the safety of planned home birth versus hospital birth. It compares numbers in the U.S. to numbers in European countries such as England and the Netherlands that people have talked about today. The rate of planned home birth in the U.S. is around 0.75%. And in England, for example, it's twice that. It's 1.5%. In the Netherlands, it's closer to 20%. When we look at similar populations of women that have a planned home birth versus a hospital birth, so that would be low-risk women, first-time moms, the rate of transport during labor for unexpected complications in labor in England ranges from 56 to 75% transport rate to a hospital during labor. And so those are women that are felt to be low risk, that have some kind of complication come up during the labor, that the person attending their labor decides they need to be transported to the hospital. Of that group of women, so 59 to 75% of first-time moms that are low risk that are transported, there is a risk of up to 54% of having some kind of severe neonatal injury, such as neonatal encephalopathy, which is one of the things associated with cerebral palsy. 8% of those women have babies that end up having brachial plexus injury, which is damage to the nerves in the arm. And there's a 13% neonatal death rate in that population. So this, again, is women that are felt to be low risk, that could deliver at home, that have up to a 75% chance of getting transported to a hospital because of complications that were not foreseen before they went into labor, that end up having up to 54% neurologic damage in their infants. In the U.S., the American College of OB-GYN says that the neonatal death rate for planned home birth versus hospital birth is 2 to 3 times what you experience with hospital birth. In the Netherlands, where the planned home birth rate is about 20% of that group, 49% of first-time moms who are felt to be low risk and that could deliver at home, 49% of those women end up getting transferred to the hospital during labor. And one of our proponents of the bill talked about the long-term mental anguish that women experience after hospital birth. In that group of women, so 49% first-time moms that get transported to the hospital during labor. 3 years later, in one of the studies in the Netherlands, 17% of those women cited severe psychological damage from the transport process and the unforeseen complications they had with their pregnancy and with the delivery of their baby. So those are women who had wanted to deliver at home, had complications, got transported to the hospital, and then had psychological trauma after that. So I think it is possible to have a midwife deliver in a hospital where you're in a safe environment, where you don't need to transport in the state of Nebraska. In England, they looked at what are the risks of, or what is the cost of raising a neurologically impaired or handicapped child, and they said £5 million, which, in our country would be, $10 million to raise a handicapped child. So that is some cost that the state would experience if we increase the number of home births. I'm open to any questions that you might have.
Questions? Dr. Chana, I have a couple of questions. Have you, in your practice, ever worked with a certified midwife?
Yes, I have worked with two.
And they are, I'm assuming that you're working with them as they help deliver in the hospital.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
But you have worked with two of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you know, I mean, you've given us a study in Europe. Are there any studies that have been done in the United States?
So the article that I gave you is from a group of obstetricians in the United States, and it looks at numbers for the U.S. and then because of the larger number of percentage of deliveries done at home in England, it compares numbers in Europe. So,
do you have an idea why the other 48 states allow this?
You know, I don't know. We have a unicameral legislature too, so we do have some unique points from other states.
Okay. Are you familiar with any of the other states in terms of what they put in regulations or how they structure that?
You know, I did some of my training in Iowa, and while I was in training there, they passed a law allowing home births by a certified midwife, and one of the stipulations of that law was that the women that were candidates had to have a visit with an obstetrician ahead of time to go over the risks and see if they were low risk.
To your knowledge, when you worked with the Iowa law, did they require a certain amount of ultrasounds and doctor visits or any of that?
No.
In the prenatal period?
When I was there.
Okay. Any other? Chris?
In the Iowa program, was it an informed consent kind of visit where you'd go over risk and assessments?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then this is way off track, and I apologize if you don't know, that's fine, but first time I've seen this word, nulliparous, N-U-L.
Nulliparous means that you haven't given birth before. So first time mom.
There you go. And multiparous, obviously, you've given birth. Okay, thank you.
You learn something every
Save
day.
me looking it up. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Senator Crawford?
Thank you, Senator Campbell. I was curious, I haven't read the article yet, obviously, but it would seem that the comparison in Europe where if home birth is much more common, that I wonder if we would assess that it's also likely that the risk factors are different in a situation where you have a much more common home birth situation versus in the U.S. if it's much more rare. And that might impact the percent who have to have or transported during delivery.
In what way?
And that if in Europe it's much more common that you might have
So
women with a higher risk choosing the home birth, as opposed to the United States, if it's much more rare, you would be more likely to have
They looked
lower
at
risk.
in the study in England. They looked at women that had. They took a group of first-time moms that were, healthy, young, no risk factors, no history of high blood pressure, diabetes, that kind of thing. They compared a similar population of women, and out of that group, it was a transport rate up to 75%.
Okay.
So, I don't know if we can compare our population to England's population. I don't know what their obesity rates are, for example. One of the concerns about why the C-section rate has risen in our country is because of the obesity rate, because women that are physically out of shape have higher risk pregnancies. The other concern I would have just about the state of Nebraska is our large rural population. And I can tell you that if, for example, one of the risks during labor is that a baby can get stuck when they're coming out. Their head comes out and their shoulders won't come. It's a very scary thing. And if that happens, you have to think, how long can that baby go without oxygen? How long can they hold their breath? How long for the emergency transport team to arrive at that house and transport that baby? So, when we think about our rural population, home birth, how long would it take to get somebody who, if the transport rates in England, which is, I would think, not have the rural population like we have, the distances to a hospital. If the transport rate is up to 50% that get transported, how would that go in our rural population? I mean, how would that happen? I mean,
Thank you. Any other questions? Dr. Trotter, one, I think, last question. As you're working with moms and moms-to-be, is there just a routine list of things that you do to determine risk? Or do you, it's almost as if a risk has to be presented before you do something. And I'm going to give you an example, gestational diabetes, for instance. We heard a lot last year in terms of moms not getting any prenatal care, not even knowing.
Right.
So could you kind of explain how you monitor? Because you're saying, well, very healthy, young, no risk, but you must be testing or determining those risks at some point.
Yeah, so we have a list of things we test for throughout the pregnancy to not only screening by asking questions, what's your history, what's your family history, but blood tests and urine tests and other kinds of testing that we do throughout the pregnancy. That's what prenatal care is, to pick up complications like diabetes and that.
And I'm making the assumption that in a lot of states in which they form a partnership with a physician, those tests are going on. I was just curious how, you make that determination about who's at risk. At what point do you make that determination?
Right. Well, I think in this article, what the point is raised is that you can have a group of women that are considered low risk, that are felt to be safe to deliver at home. And the transport rate, for example, in England, in that population, was close to 50%. So low risk going into the actual labor process. So that means their pregnancy was low risk. They didn't have diabetes. They didn't have high blood pressure. They didn't have any foreseeable reason why they felt that they had to deliver in a hospital. And yet 50% of those women were transported to the hospital because of complications that arose that were not foreseen during the actual labor process.
Got it. Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Trotter.
Yeah.
Our next opponent